Hey everyone, so on this week's episode of Make It with Calvin, I'm going to show you guys how you can take some pieces of steel that you can buy at really any home improvement center, work a little bit of brazing, welding, soldering, whatever you want to call it, magic, and make one of these, pretty sweet little spool holder. So let's dive into the project. So for materials, obviously you are going to need some steel. This is just 1/4-inch rod that I picked up from local Lowe's and cost me under $5 to get a 1/4 by 3-foot piece, which if you ask me is pretty cheap. So what you're going to want to do is cut 2 pieces that are 11 inches long, and you're going to want to cut 1 piece that is about 3.5 to 4 inches long. When you're done cutting, you obviously notice that the ends are not going to be very clean. They're probably going to be sharp, covered in burrs. So take a minute to grind the ends smooth like I did here. And on one of the ends, you're going to want to round it off a little bit. Doesn't need to be anything fancy. I just did this by hand on my belt sander out of frame. Very easy to do. Very critical step for safety. Don't skimp on this. Just do it. Believe me, you don't want to cut yourself, scratch the table, anything like that with this. So do that. Now the next thing that we are going to want to do is we are going to mark 4 inches from the end of the rod for the 2 long ones. This is going to be our bend location so we can create the legs. If you look at it somewhat like this, you can see it's just a simple 90. I like to go a little bit positive so that it's got I'm exaggerating it here, but it has a slight inwards inclination. So when it's sitting there by itself, it doesn't want to fall backwards. So let me go ahead and mark these and set up for the bend. Items you will need for bending are going to be a small vise, and out of frame I have my oxyacetylene rig. I'm only using that because it's really fast and easy. If you have a propane torch or a MAP gas torch, you'll probably be able to get away with it, although those are going to take longer to heat the metal up to a point where it's nice and easy to bend. So let me get set up. Okay, so we have everything set up here. Very, very, very critical. I almost bent the part wrong because of this. You're going to want to make sure that the rounded end is sticking out on the side that you want to bend, because this is going to become the outside of the foot. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to light up my torch, and I'm just going to come along in here and warm the metal up until it's glowing about orange hot, so it's nice and easy to bend. Come along with a pair of pliers, grab it from the end and bend it straight. If when you're bending it, it cocks down a little bit, don't worry about that, because that's going to be fixed later on. The whole point behind doing this as a multi-piece is if your bends aren't perfect, it won't screw you up later on. So let's heat this up and bend it. And sorry if this will potentially shake a little bit. I'll do my best not to. Okay, this rod is still very hot, so you're not going to see me actually touching the bend location. But a tip, when you're trying to bend something, especially when you're using an oxyacetylene rig, try and pinpoint the heat only in the area that you're after bending. That way you get a nice crisp bend like that. It's not some giant funky radius. So what you did notice is it took me 2 attempts. I got the rough bend going, then I flipped it upright and used the longer leg as a bit of a fulcrum to get everything right. Also, you can tell that it is not a perfect 90. It is actually slightly leaning inwards, which, like I mentioned, is what we want. If it's not perfect, we can go back and adjust it, but try and match your angles to each other so they're relatively equal. If it's off a little bit, it's not the end of the world, but it kind of saves you some work in the long run. So let me jump ahead and bit of off-camera fine-tuning later, and we have our 2 legs done. Now comes the other important part of the build. This is where we are actually going to attach the 2 legs and also this guy, which is the mount for the spool. For this, we are going to want the legs to be about 5.5 to 5 3/4 of an inch apart. You can make it a little bit wider, you can make it a little bit narrower. It's totally up to you. It's just, those are the numbers that I'm working off of. The other thing is, when we go to do this, we're obviously going to want to keep the legs upright. There's a couple of ways that you can go about doing this. In my case, I have a bunch of third hand tools that I made in another video. If you want to go check that out, I'll have a link in the description. They're definitely not required for the project, but man, are they nice. Another option that you have is potentially taking some blocks or something just to hold the legs up. Really, you want things that are going to hold everything in place, so when you go to braze it, nothing's like halfway through and falls over, and that's never a fun feeling. So let me go ahead, get everything set up, show you guys how I'm going to braze it, and go from there. If you don't have brazing equipment, don't worry. You could always weld it if you really wanted to. For me, I'm brazing it because I actually like the look of silicon bronze, and I have a flux core MIG welder, and the thing is nice, but the problem with flux core MIG is it splatters like nobody's business because of the flux. So for something artistic like this, silicon bronze brazing is the way to go. You can buy various brazing rods at various places, or if you know somebody with a welder, offer them a couple of bucks and have them put it together for you. So when it comes to the leg spacing, I went about 5.5 inches from there to there. It's, you know, it doesn't need to be exactly that. There's a lot of wiggle room with the design, so don't freak out if it's not perfect. It's perfectly fine. So let me go ahead and clean the metal up and grind the flat spots, and I'll get back to you guys. And when it comes to the flat spots, the angles don't need to be exact. The only thing you don't want is like a big old gap in between. That's not a good thing. Brazing is not the world's greatest gap filler. And the other thing is you're just going to sit there and shove a lot of rod in, which can be a little bit wasteful. So let me clean these up. I'll go back to you guys. Okay, sorry if I'm a little bit hard to see in this shot, but as you can tell, it is a sea of third hand tools. Now obviously these are not totally required. This is just what I happen to have lying around, so that made my life easier. Sorry if I did not make it abundantly clear earlier in the video when I said to grind the sides. I should have also put in that they need to be parallel to the upper legs, and it is only on the inside. It just helps to fill the gap in, and I'll overlay a photo as well. If you really wanted to get picky, you could also grind this guy so it fits up a little bit higher, but I figure I actually want in that one area a lot of braze metal to flow, so it's not a bad. Well, as you guys can tell there at the end, my 2 third hand tools accidentally fell off, but I have now successfully completed the braze joint. Sorry if it was a little bit difficult to watch. I was trying to make sure I wasn't throwing a 5,000 plus degree flame at my GoPro, and the big old battery pack on the GoPro rig, I don't think that would have made for a very good episode. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to dunk this thing into a quench tank, which is pretty much just water and vinegar that I use for pickling it. We'll discuss that more in a minute. And then we'll come along, bend the little hook up here, and discuss some options that you have when you're done doing this. Now in my case, the brazing job turned out pretty good. and there's a little bit of overflow on the edges. So I think I'm going to take it over to my belt sander off camera to clean everything up a little bit, as this model is special because it is going out to Dustin, aka the Japman. He asked me if I could make him one, and I said sure. But now what we can do is we can work on bending the end here, and then in another video I'm going to kind of more show probably a time lapse of me more or less polishing it, giving it a brushed finish, something like that. So let's go ahead, heat up the end, bend the end, and that'll be that. Okay, and easy as that. We have ourselves a completed spool holder. Kind of the beauty of this is you could actually use it for a lot more applications than just 3D printing. But in my case, I figured, hey, why not use it for 3D printing, as I really didn't like 3D printing a spool holder that I could make out of metal. So I hope you guys enjoyed this little how-to episode of Make It with Calvin. I might be actually coming up with some more cool metal inspired projects in the future, and if you guys have any questions or comments or suggestions, please leave them down below. I'd love to take on some of your suggestions for doable projects and go from there. So we'll see you guys next time here on Make It with Calvin. And as for me, I'm gonna go polish this thing up because that would look really sweet.